page 573. So all 8 of these classifications of free inhabitants elbowed one another on the crowded square inch of Campside, between camp and forest, between forest and swamp, and between camp and mine. 8 different categories, various ranks and classes, and they all had to fit into that stench-ridden, crowded settlement. They were all comrades to each other, and they sent their children to the same school. The kind of comrades they were was just such that, like saints up in the clouds, up above everyone else, 2 or 3 local magnates floated. In Ikebutsuts, their names were Kishchuk and Karasturk. The director of the chief engineer of the trust, and I did not think up those names. And then, in descending order, with sharp lines of division carefully observed, the chief of camp, the commander of the convoy battalion, other ranking officials of the trust, other officers of the camp, officers of the battalion, and, in places, the director of the workers' supply section, and, in places, the director of the school, but not the teachers. And the higher they went, the more jealously the walls separating them were guarded, and the greater the significance attached to which woman could go and visit whom, so that they could sit down and chew sunflower seeds together. They were not princesses, nor even countesses, and so they looked around at all the more vigilantly to make sure their position had not been degraded. Oh, what a doomed state it was to live in this narrow world, far away from other well-provided-for families living in comfortable, spacious cities. Here everyone you knew, and you couldn't just get up and go to the movies without lowering yourself, and of course you could not go to a store. The more so since they brought the best of the freshest things to your home. It even seemed improper to keep your own piglet. It was demeaning for the wife and so-and-so to feed it with her own hands. That is why it was necessary to have a servant from the camp, and in the several wards of the settlement hospital, how difficult it was to keep apart from the tatterdemalions and trash and to lie among decent neighbors. And you had to send your nice children to sit behind the same desks as whom? But farther down, these dividing walls quickly lost their position and their significance, and there were no longer any trouble-making meddlers to keep watch over them. Further down, the categories inevitably commingled, encountered each other, bought and sold together, ran to get in lines, and argued about the New Year's tree's gifts from the trade unions, sat all mixed up together any which way at the movies, both genuine Soviet people and those totally unworthy of this title. One spiritual center of such settlements was the main tea room, in some rotting barracks near which the trucks lined up, and from which the drunkards, howling out songs, belching and stumbling, wandered around through the whole settlement, and among the very same mud puddles and masks of squishy, muddy, with the second spiritual center, the club, its floor covered with hulls of spat-out sunflower seeds, scuffed by boots, with a fly-blown wall newspaper from the previous year, with the constantly grumbling loudspeaker over the door, with the good old mother curses at the dance, and the night fights and the film show. The style and tone of the local places was, don't be out late, and if you took a girl to a dance, the safest thing to do was to put a horseshoe in your mitten. Yes, and some of the girls there were such that even a gang of 7 youths would flee from them. Excuse me. The club was a knife in the officers' hearts. Naturally, it was quite impossible for the officers to go to dances in a shed like that among people of that kind. The enlisted men of the guard went there when they were on leave passes, but the trouble was that the young childless officers' wives were drawn there too, even without their husbands, and they would end up dancing with the enlisted men. Rank and file soldiers embraced the officers' wives, so how could you expect faultless obedience from them on duty the next day? After all, this was equality, and no army can stand up under those conditions. Unable to prevent their wives from going to the dances, the officers managed to get the dances declared out of bounds to enlisted men. Let some dirty Volnyashki embrace their wives. But what this did was to introduce a crack in the symmetry of the political indoctrination of the enlisted men, that we're all happy and equal citizens of the Soviet state, and that our enemies are, you see, behind barbed wire.
Many such complex tensions were hidden in Campside, and many contradictions among its 8 categories, mingling in everyday life with the repressed and semi-repressed, honest Soviet citizens would not neglect to reproach them and put them in their place, especially when it was a matter of a room in a new barracks. And the jailers, as wearers of the MVD uniform, claimed to be on a higher plane than the ordinary free people. And then there were invariably women in everyone's bad books because of the single guys. If the single guys would have lost without them, because all the single guys would have lost without them. And there were also women who had plans for getting a permanent man. That kind would go to the camp gatehouse when they knew there would be a release, and they would grab complete strangers. By the sleeve, come to my place. I have a place, and I will keep you warm. I will buy you a suit. Well, where are you going? After all, they'll just jug you again. And there was also a security surveillance over the whole settlement. The settlement had its own godfather and its own stoolies, and they would flex their muscles, just who was taking letters from the sex to be mailed outside, and who was selling camp clothing behind the corner of the barracks. And then, too, of course, there was less sense of the presence of the law among the inhabitants of Campside than anywhere else in the Soviet Union, or that their barracks room was a castle. Some had unclean passports, and others had no passports at all. And others had been imprisoned in camp themselves, and others were members of families. And thus all these independent, unconvoyed citizens were even more obedient than the prisoners in the command of a man with a rifle, even more meek in the face of the man with a revolver. Excuse me. When you saw one, you did not throw back their proud heads and declare, "You don't have the right." They would shrink and bow their heads and slink past. And this sense of unlimited power of the bayonet in a uniform hovered so confidently over the expanses of the archipelago and Campside, so it communicated itself to everyone who entered the region, that the free woman, initial P, who flew to Krasnoyarsk with her little girl to visit her husband in camp, allowed herself to be searched and patted all over at the first demand of the MVD officials in the plane, and allowed her child to be completely undressed. Since then, the little girl has wept every time she sees the sky blues. But if someone now says that there is nothing sadder than these camp environs, and that Campside is a Seward, we will reply, that depends on the individual. A Yakut named Kolodeznikov got 3 years in 1932 for rustling reindeer, and, under our perspicacious relocation policy, was sent from his native Kolyma to serve his time near Leningrad. He served out his time and was in Leningrad itself, and he brought his family some bright-colored dress materials, yet for many years after complained to his fellow tribesmen and to the Czechs who had been sent from Leningrad, "Oh, it's boring where you come from. It's awful." Thank you for listening. Chapter 22 is next time. I look forward to it. Have a great day.